Snow fell so thick it swallowed sound itself. In the mountain wilderness of northern Montana, where pine forests gave way to jagged peaks and the Canadian border existed only as a line on maps no one carried, a SEAL platoon sat trapped in a valley painted white. The radio hissed static. The satellite signal had died somewhere in the clouds 2 hours ago. GPS units showed nothing but error messages, their screens flickering like dying heartbeats. Captain Nathan Briggs pressed his gloved hand against a frozen rock face, feeling the mountain vibrate with something he couldn't identify. Distant thunder, perhaps, or explosions. In this weather, sound traveled strangely, bouncing off canyon walls and arriving from directions that made no sense. His breath came in controlled bursts, fogging the air for half a second before the wind tore it away. Behind him, 7 operators moved through knee-deep powder like shadows. Their movements remained synchronized despite the brutal conditions. Muscle memory from years of training together, keeping them in formation even when visibility dropped to arm's length. This wasn't supposed to be a combat mission. Intelligence gathering, asset verification. Extract one informant from a small settlement on the northern ridge. 12 hours in country, minimal exposure, 0 contact expected. That was the brief. The brief was wrong. Senior Chief Ryan Caldwell appeared beside Briggs, his voice low despite the howling wind that would have drowned out a shout. Movement on the western slope. Could be wildlife, could be something else. Briggs adjusted his night vision, scanning the gradient where rock met sky. Nothing but swirling white. The storm had turned the world into a blank canvas, erasing landmarks and reference points until every direction looked the same. How far? Maybe 400 meters. Hard to tell with a snow-cutting visibility like this. Chief Petty Officer Dwight Harmon jogged up from the rear, his medical pack bouncing against his spine. He moved with the careful efficiency of a man who'd patched up wounded operators in worse conditions than this, but his face showed concern. Mackenzie's pace is slowing. That ankle from the drop isn't holding. Briggs cursed silently. Master Chief Earl Mackenzie had landed wrong during their helicopter insertion, turning his ankle on hidden ice beneath the snow. He'd said nothing for 6 hours, pushing through on adrenaline and pride, and 48 years of refusing to be the weak link in any chain. Now 12 clicks from the extraction point, physics was sending its bill. How bad? He's masking it well, but he's favoring the left leg hard. Another hour at this pace, and he won't be walking at all. The Montana wilderness stretched before them like frozen hell. This corner of the state existed in a gray zone, too remote for regular law enforcement, too rugged for casual hikers, too close to the border for anyone to pay much attention to what happened here. Intelligence reports suggested a weapons trafficking network had established operations in the area. Russian connections, former Soviet bloc military equipment flowing south, while American cash flowed north. The kind of operation that existed in shadows and died in daylight. The kind of operation that killed anyone who asked too many questions. Petty Officer Garrett Langley appeared from the point position, his face mask crusted with ice. The settlement is gone. Briggs felt his stomach drop. Defined gone, burned, recent, maybe 36 hours. Bodies in the central area. Our informant isn't there. Nobody's there. At least nobody alive. Langley's voice carried the flat tone of a man reporting facts he wished weren't true. Could be survivors scattered in the hills. Could be we walked into someone else's war. A crack echoed across the valley. Not thunder, not avalanche. Briggs had heard that sound too many times in too many countries to mistake it for anything natural. Heavy caliber fire, maybe a 50 cal, north, maybe 2 clicks distant. He made the call in 3 seconds. We moved to the fallback position. Harmon, get Mackenzie mobile. Langley, take point with Brennan. We're not running, but we're not sightseeing either. Petty Officer Scott Brennan moved up beside Langley, both men checking their weapons with practiced efficiency that required no thought. The team began moving again, faster now. The easy rhythm of their approach replaced by something harder, something that acknowledged the world had shifted beneath their feet. The fallback position was a natural formation they'd identified on satellite imagery before insertion, a semicircle of boulders that offered cover from 3 sides. In summer, it probably served as a rest stop for the rare hiker who ventured this deep into the wilderness. In winter, it was just another patch of frozen stone, but it had sight lines and defensible angles. Right now, that made it prime real estate. They reached it 20 minutes later. Mackenzie collapsed against a boulder the moment Briggs gave the signal, his face gray beneath the cold weather paint. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like cables, but he made no sound of complaint. Harmon went to work immediately, injecting something that would dull the pain without dulling Mackenzie's mind. In the field, clarity was survival. A man who couldn't think straight was a man who got his team killed. Radio check. Petty Officer Travis Whitmore, their communications specialist, shook his head. Still nothing. The storm's playing hell with everything. I can't even get a carrier tone. Satellite phone? Same problem. Whatever this weather system is, it's like operating inside a metal box. Signals go in, nothing comes out. Briggs looked at the sky. Gray upon gray upon gray. Layers of clouds so thick he couldn't tell where one ended and another began. They'd expected bad weather. The forecast had called for snow. But this was something else. Something that turned the mountains into a signal-dead maze. How long until the extraction window? 6 hours. But if they can't reach us, they won't risk the birds in this soup. Which meant they were on their own, in hostile territory, with a wounded operator and no idea what had happened to the settlement, or why someone was shooting heavy weapons just over the next ridge. Perimeter security. Briggs kept his voice calm, the way he always did when situations went sideways. Panic was contagious. Calm was too. 2-man rotation, 30-minute shifts. Get warm if you can, get fed if you can, but stay sharp. Something's wrong with this whole picture. The team spread out, establishing overlapping fields of fire. Kyle Donovan and Scott Brennan took the first watch, settling into positions where they could scan the approaches without skylining themselves. Briggs sat down beside Mackenzie. How's the ankle? Been worse. Mackenzie's voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he drank from his canteen. I can still shoot. I know you can. But can you move? Mackenzie met his eyes. Both men knew the answer without speaking it. In a running firefight, Mackenzie would be a liability. And in these mountains, standing still was how you died. We'll adapt. It wasn't an answer, but it was all Briggs had. The wind shifted, bringing a smell that made every operator reach for their weapons simultaneously. Not wood smoke from a cooking fire. Something else. Something chemical. That's cordite. Caldwell's voice was barely a whisper. Someone's burning munitions, or someone hit an ammunition depot. Donovan's voice cut through the wind. Northeast quadrant. 500 meters, multiple figures. Briggs pulled up his optics. Through the swirling snow, he caught glimpses of shapes moving along the ridgeline. Not soldiers, not exactly. The movement was too irregular, too cautious. Civilians fleeing something, or armed men advancing towards something. Count? Hard to say. At least a dozen. They're spread out, moving slow. Armed. Can't tell what they're carrying at this distance. The figures disappeared behind the terrain, swallowed by the snow and the stone. Briggs waited, counting seconds, watching for them to reappear. They didn't. Whitmore, try the emergency frequency. Broadcast in the clear. Let anyone listening know we're American military in a non-combat posture, requesting safe passage to our extraction point. Whitmore worked his radio, sending the message on every channel they had. Nothing came back but static and the howl of wind through empty frequencies. Captain, Brennan called from his position. You should see this. Briggs moved to join him, keeping low despite the cover. Brennan pointed down into the valley below their position. Through a gap in the snow, Briggs saw what looked like a small convoy. 3 vehicles moving in single file along a road that was barely visible beneath the white. But they weren't civilian trucks. They had the heavy suspension and reinforced frames of military transport. Technicals, maybe, or something worse. Militia, or worse. Briggs tracked the convoy through his scope. The vehicles disappeared around a bend, heading deeper into the wilderness. Briggs felt the tactical situation crystallizing in his mind. Options narrowing with each passing minute. They were in the middle of someone else's fight, a conflict they knew nothing about, with no communications, a wounded team member, and an extraction window that might as well be on the moon. We need to move. He returned to the center of their position. This location is compromised, too visible, too static. We need to find somewhere with better cover and better sightlines. Where? Harmon asked. Everything out here is either open valley or exposed ridge. Briggs pulled out his map, the paper crackling with cold. There was a notation marked 3 clicks northeast, an old mining complex according to the intelligence packet. Abandoned, possibly collapsed, but it might offer shelter in a defensive position that wasn't just boulders in the snow. Here, he tapped the map. We move now, before full dark. Can Mackenzie make 3 clicks? Harmon looked at Mackenzie. Mackenzie nodded. Neither man was convinced, but neither man had a better option. Langley, Brennan, you're on point. Donovan, Whitmore, rear security. Everyone else, stay tight and stay sharp. This place is making my teeth itch. They moved out, leaving the fallback position behind. The snow seemed to fall harder, as if the mountains themselves wanted to bury them. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. They all knew they were walking into something that didn't have a name yet, something that would find them before they found it. The mining complex was worse than the map suggested. What had once been a series of buildings was now just foundations and collapsed walls, half buried under decades of snow and neglect. The mine entrance itself had caved in years ago, leaving a dark mouth of broken timber and tumbled rock. But there was one structure still partially intact, a storage building with 3 walls and most of a roof. The 4th wall had crumbled, leaving an opening that faced away from the prevailing wind. It wasn't warm, it wasn't comfortable, but it was cover. Briggs positioned his team inside, setting fields of fire through the gaps in the remaining walls. Mackenzie sat with his back against the most solid section, his rifle across his lap, ready despite the pain etched around his eyes. This is where we make our stand if we have to. Briggs kept his voice low but clear. But our primary objective is still extraction. We hold here until the weather breaks or communications come back online. And if neither happens, Donovan asked, then we walk out, 70 clicks to the border. We've done worse. It was a lie. Everyone knew it was a lie. 70 clicks through hostile territory in winter with a wounded operator and no support was a death sentence. But it was a lie that kept them focused. Focus was what kept them alive. The afternoon stretched into evening. The snow continued falling. Whitmore tried every frequency, every protocol, every trick he'd learned in 10 years of military communications. Nothing. Then at 1800 hours, everything changed. The first explosion came from the south, a deep boom that rolled across the valley like thunder from an angry god. Briggs was on his feet instantly, weapon ready, scanning for threats. Contact, Langley called out. Negative. That was indirect fire, at least a click away. Another explosion, closer this time, and another. Someone was walking artillery across the valley floor, systematically pounding positions Briggs couldn't see, driving something toward them, or driving something away. They're boxing us in. Caldwell's voice was tight, pushing us toward something. The gunfire started 5 minutes later. Small arms at first, the distinctive crack of AK pattern rifles mixed with something heavier. Then tracers began arcing through the darkening sky. Red and green lines that painted the snow with deadly light. Contact front, Brennan shouted. Multiple targets, 400 meters, moving toward our position. Briggs saw them through his scope. At least 20 figures, maybe more, moving in a loose skirmish line across the valley floor. Behind them, pushing them forward, he caught glimpses of heavier weapons, vehicle-mounted possibly. They're not attacking. He realized it as he said it. They're fleeing. Doesn't matter if they run straight through us. The fleeing group drew closer, their panic visible even at distance. They weren't looking where they were going, just running from what was behind them. And what was behind them was now opening fire on the storage building. Tracers snapped through the air, impacting the broken walls in bursts of stone and sparks. One round punched through the gap where the 4th wall should have been, missing Whitmore by inches. Return fire, Briggs ordered. Aimed shots, conserve ammunition. The SEALs opened up, their disciplined fire cutting into the advancing chaos. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and in a position that was rapidly becoming untenable. We need to move. Where? Briggs fired 3 rounds, saw one target drop. We're in a kill box. And they were. The storage building sat at the bottom of a natural depression with high ground on three sides. Anyone with basic military training could turn this place into a slaughter zone. Someone was doing exactly that. Heavy machine gun fire began raking their position, systematic bursts that walked across the building's facade. Stone chips flew like shrapnel. One round caught Brennan in the shoulder plate, spinning him around but not penetrating. He was back in position 2 seconds later, returning fire. Whitmore. Anything on the radio? Negative. The interference is worse than before. Another explosion, this one close enough to shower them with dirt and snow. Briggs felt the pressure wave in his chest, his ears ringing despite the protection. This wasn't a firefight. This was an execution. Langley pointed to the western approach. More targets, this time moving with discipline. These weren't refugees. These were soldiers. The situation had gone from bad to catastrophic in less than 10 minutes. They were surrounded, outgunned, taking fire from multiple directions, with a wounded operator and no communications. Briggs ran through their options. The list was short, none of them good. Stand and fight, and they'd be overrun within the hour. Try to break out, and Mackenzie wouldn't make it 50 meters. Call for help, but no one was listening. Conserve ammunition. He kept his voice steady. Controlled bursts only. Make every round count. The team tightened their perimeter, each operator falling back to a position that offered better cover. Mackenzie dragged himself to a corner where two walls met, creating a narrow angle that was harder to hit. His face was the color of old snow, but his hands were steady on his rifle. The attackers pressed closer. Their fire increased in volume and accuracy. Briggs felt a round tug at his sleeve. Another cracked past his head close enough to hear the supersonic snap. They were running out of time. Then, through the chaos of gunfire and explosions, a new voice cut through their tactical net. Young, female, calm as ice. American unit, hold your fire. Northwest quadrant. Friendlies approaching. Every SEAL froze for a fraction of a second. The voice didn't match anything they expected to hear. In this place, at this time, in this situation, say again, Briggs demanded. Hold fire northwest. Friendlies. 3 personnel. I repeat, hold fire. Authenticate, Briggs snapped. But even as he said it, he knew there was no authentication protocol for whatever this was. Through the snow and gunfire, 3 figures appeared on the northwest approach. 2 were men, local by their clothing. Hunters, maybe, or what passed for militia in these parts. Their weapons were a mix of hunting rifles and older military surplus. But it was the third figure that made Briggs hesitate. A girl, maybe 16 years old, small and thin in an oversized white coat that made her nearly invisible against the snow. She carried a rifle that looked older than she was, a Remington 700 with a wooden stock worn smooth from years of use. And she moved across the battlefield like she'd been born to it, calm, efficient, reading the terrain with eyes that had seen too much for someone her age. She reached their position in 30 seconds. The 2 men covered her approach, their fire adding to the chaos in a way that actually helped rather than hindered. Up close, Briggs could see she was even younger than he'd first thought. 15, maybe 16. Her face was thin, all sharp angles and serious eyes that tracked across the SEAL position with professional assessment. You're trapped. She spoke with no accent. Pure American English. The valley is closed. They have mortars on the ridge. Technicals with heavy weapons on the east approach. Who are you? Someone who knows these mountains. She pointed to the southern approach where the heaviest fire was coming from. That's Volkov's organization. They've been clearing settlements in this area for 3 months. Burned my village 2 days ago. Killed everyone they found. Her voice didn't waver. Didn't break. Just stated facts like they were weather reports. Why should we trust you? Langley's voice was sharp with suspicion. The girl looked at him with eyes that had stopped being young a long time ago. Because in 5 minutes they'll bring up their technical with the mounted 50 cal. Your position won't survive it. You need to move. I know where. You don't. Briggs studied her face, looking for deception, looking for the trap this had to be. He found neither. Just a teenager who'd learned to survive in a place where survival shouldn't be possible. She's 16, someone muttered. Someone actually laughed. 3 seconds later, the girl raised her rifle. Fired once. Somewhere in the snow behind them, someone stopped shooting. "She's 16, she said flatly, "and she just saved your rear flank from the spotter who was calling in your position. We can discuss my age later. Right now we move. Or we die." "Your choice, Captain." Briggs made the decision in 2 seconds. "Where do we go?" The girl pointed northeast toward a section of the valley that looked like open ground. "There's a ravine. Deep enough for cover. We can hold there until I get you to the caves." They don't know the ravine is there. Too much snow. They can't see it from their positions. "That's open ground. They'll cut us down." "No." The girl shook her head. "The wind is from the west. The snow will cover our movement. Trust me or don't. But decide now." Briggs looked at his team. Mackenzie could barely stand. Whitmore's radio was useless. They were low on ammunition and lower on options. And this teenager was offering them the only chance they had. "All right, we move on your signal. But if this is a setup, then I die first," the girl interrupted. "Because I'll be leading." She turned to the two men and spoke rapidly in what might have been a local dialect. They nodded, checked their weapons, and moved to positions covering the northeast approach. "When I signal, you move fast. Don't stop. Don't look back. The ravine is 200 meters. You have maybe 90 seconds before they adjust their fire. Mackenzie can't run." The girl looked at the wounded SEAL, assessed the situation in a glance. "2 of your men carry him. The rest provide covering fire. It's the only way." Briggs assigned Harmon and Donovan to Mackenzie. Both operators checked their loadout, redistributing weight so they could move fast with their burden. The rest of the team readied for a fighting withdrawal. "Now," the girl said. The 2 local men opened fire, their weapons adding to the chaos. The girl ran, and the SEALs followed. Briggs had done dozens of combat movements in his career. Running across open ground in a blizzard while under fire was a new experience. The snow was deeper than it looked. Each step a struggle against powder that grabbed at boots and tried to pull them down. Tracers burned through the white, some so close Briggs felt their heat. An explosion behind them threw Donovan forward, but he kept his grip on Mackenzie. The girl ran ahead, never looking back. Her white coat made her almost invisible in the snow, a ghost leading them through a frozen hell. Then she dropped into the ground, simply disappeared. For a terrible second, Briggs thought she'd been hit. Then he understood. The ravine was there, exactly where she'd said, a crack in the earth that the snow had hidden completely. "Go!" he shouted. His team dove into the opening. The ravine was narrow but deep, its walls steep enough to offer protection from direct fire. The SEALs tumbled into it, weapons ready, scanning for threats. Mackenzie groaned as Harmon and Donovan set him down. The movement had been rougher than intended, but they were alive. The girl was already positioned, her rifle trained on the approach they'd just used. The 2 local men appeared seconds later, sliding down the ravine walls. One was bleeding from a shoulder wound, but he waved off assistance. "They'll reposition," the girl said without looking away from her scope. "We have maybe 3 minutes before they find us again." Briggs did a quick head count. All operators accounted for. Ammunition critical but not exhausted. Mackenzie conscious and alert despite the pain. It wasn't good, but it was better than 30 seconds ago. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl fired once. Somewhere above them, someone stopped shooting. "Cora Mercer. My father was American, former Army, came to this area 15 years ago, married my mother, raised me in these mountains." "Where is he now?" "Dead. Volkov's men, 2 days ago." Her voice was flat, stating facts. "My mother too. My brother. 23 people from our settlement. They killed them in the open while I was hunting in the high country." Briggs felt something cold settle in his stomach, something that had nothing to do with the weather. "I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Help me make them pay." The words hung in the frozen air. Before Briggs could respond, gunfire erupted above the ravine. Volkov's forces had found them faster than expected. Rounds snapped overhead, ricocheting off stone walls, but the ravine's depth gave them protection. For the moment. "Captain," Cora said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "you want to know why you should trust me?" She pulled something from beneath her coat, a photograph. worn and creased from being carried close to someone's heart. Two men in military gear standing in front of mountains that weren't these mountains. Afghanistan, maybe. Somewhere with rocks and dust instead of snow. One of the men was young, maybe 25. The other was older, harder, with eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. My grandfather, Colonel Hank Mercer, he served in Afghanistan in 1985. Special operations, counter-Soviet missions. Briggs stared at the photograph. The name meant something. A legend from the Cold War era. One of the quiet professionals who'd fought in shadows while the world pretended nothing was happening. Your grandfather was Hank Mercer? He raised my father in these mountains after he retired. Then he raised me after my father came back from his own service. He taught me everything I know. How to shoot, how to survive, how to read terrain and weather and men. Cora's eyes met his. He also taught me about Sergei Volkov. They were enemies in Afghanistan. Volkov was KGB. My grandfather was what he was. They hunted each other for 3 years. Grandfather always said Volkov was the one who got away. The one enemy he never finished. The gunfire above intensified. Volkov is here, in Montana. He runs the weapons network your people came to investigate. But it's personal now. He found out my grandfather's family was in these mountains. Found out grandfather died 2 years ago. Decided to finish what he started 40 years ago. Wipe out every Mercer he could find. And you survived. I survived because grandfather prepared me. Because he knew somehow that Volkov would come eventually. He spent 10 years training me for a day he hoped would never arrive. Cora turned back to her rifle. Now that day is here, and you're caught in the middle of a war that started before I was born. Another explosion rocked the ravine. Briggs made his decision. Where do we go from here? The caves, 3 kilometers northeast. My grandfather used them as a training ground. I know every tunnel, every exit, every defensive position. We can hold there until your extraction comes, or until the weather breaks. And Volkov? He doesn't know the caves exist. My grandfather made sure of that. Made sure the only people who knew were Mercers. Briggs looked at his team. They were beaten up, running low on everything that mattered, trapped in a ravine, while enemies closed in from every direction. But they were still alive, because of a 16-year-old girl with her grandfather's rifle, and her grandfather's knowledge, and her grandfather's war. We move, he said. On your lead. Cora nodded once. Then she began climbing out of the ravine, moving up the wall with the confidence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. The SEALs followed. The climb out of the ravine nearly killed them. The walls were steep and coated with ice. Each handhold uncertain, each foothold a gamble. Mackenzie had to be hauled up by Harmon and Donovan, their arms burning with effort, while their fingers went numb from cold. The Master Chief's face was a mask of agony, but he made no sound beyond controlled breathing. 48 years old and still refusing to be the reason anyone slowed down. Cora went first, moving up the ravine wall like she'd done it 1,000 times. Probably had. At the top, she paused, scanning the terrain before waving them forward. Her white coat made her nearly invisible against the snow, a ghost in a frozen world. The SEALs followed one by one until the entire team was out of the ravine and exposed on the mountainside. The wind hit them like a physical force. Snow stung exposed skin and reduced visibility to arm's length. Briggs couldn't see more than 30 meters in any direction. That would hide them from the enemy. But it also meant they were navigating blind through hostile territory, following a teenage girl, trusting her with their lives. Cora moved forward, her steps sure despite the conditions. Briggs followed, trusting her to navigate while he kept his weapon ready. Behind him, the rest of the team moved in disciplined spacing, each operator covering a different field of fire. They'd been moving for 20 minutes when Cora held up a fist. The entire team froze. Briggs moved up beside her, following her gaze. Through a momentary gap in the snow, he saw them, Volkov's men, at least a dozen, moving in a loose formation below their position, heading toward the ravine the SEALs had just left. In 5 minutes, maybe less, they'd find it empty and begin searching the surrounding terrain. Down, Cora whispered. The entire group dropped flat against the snow-covered slope. Briggs watched through his scope as the enemy passed below. They moved with the confidence of men who own this territory, weapons held casually, talking among themselves. One had a radio, Another carried what looked like a thermal imaging device. If that imager swept their position, the fight was over. Cora was already moving, low and slow, working her way to a position where a cluster of rocks provided both cover and a shooting angle. She settled in behind her rifle, the barrel resting on a flat stone, her breathing slowing to something mechanical. Briggs recognized what he was seeing. This was a trained sniper taking a position, not a teenager with a rifle. Someone had taught her well. She'd learned even better through months of survival. "What's your effective range with that rifle?" he whispered, moving beside her. 600 meters. Further, if the wind is calm and I have time to calculate. The targets are 400 meters below us. Can you take the one with the thermal imager? Yes, but the moment I fire, they'll know we're here. You'll need to be ready to move fast. Briggs turned to his team, issuing silent hand signals. Everyone nodded their understanding. When Cora fired, they'd sprint for the next cover position while she bought them time with precision fire. Make it count. Cora's breathing steadied even further. Her finger moved to the trigger, but she didn't fire. She was waiting, reading the wind, watching the target's movement, calculating angles Briggs couldn't even see. 5 seconds passed. 10. The enemy fighters were starting to spread out, beginning their search of the terrain. 5 seconds, Cora whispered. Briggs tensed, ready to give the movement order. 3 seconds. The wind shifted slightly, carrying snow in a different pattern. 1 second. Cora fired. The sound was shockingly loud in the muffled landscape, a crack that echoed off the mountains. 400 meters below, the fighter carrying the thermal imager jerked and fell. The device tumbled from his hands into the snow. Move! The SEALs ran. Cora fired twice more in rapid succession, aimed shots that forced the remaining fighters to dive for cover rather than returning fire. Then she was up and running with them, her rifle slung across her back, moving with the same speed and control she'd shown climbing out of the ravine. Gunfire erupted behind them. Tracers arced through the snow. But they were already moving, using terrain and weather for cover. Briggs heard rounds snapping past, felt the pressure of near misses, but kept driving forward. There, Cora pointed to a depression in the terrain, a shallow bowl that would give them cover from direct fire. The team piled into it, weapons immediately trained on their back trail. Below them, Volkov's men were reorganizing, shouting to each other, trying to determine where the shots had come from. Without the thermal imager, they were guessing. In this storm, guessing was almost impossible. How far to the caves? 2 kilometers. But we can't go straight there. They'll track us. We need to loop north, cross the ridge, then approach the caves from the east. That's another hour at least. Or we go straight and lead them right to our only defensive position. Cora's logic was sound. Briggs knew it. He just didn't like it. We loop north. Mackenzie, how are you holding? Still breathing. Mackenzie managed through gritted teeth. His leg was swelling badly now, despite Harmon's field dressing. Can you make 2 more kilometers? Mackenzie's answer was to struggle to his feet, leaning heavily on his rifle as a makeshift crutch. Let's find out. They moved out again, this time angling north across the mountainside. The storm was intensifying, which was both blessing and curse. Visibility dropped to 20 meters, but that also meant they couldn't see threats until they were nearly on top of them. Cora led them across terrain that should have been impassable. Narrow ledges, steep climbs, sections where one wrong step meant a fall that would end in broken bones or worse. But she navigated it all with absolute confidence, never hesitating, never second-guessing. Briggs found himself revising his assessment of the girl with every step. This wasn't just local knowledge. This was someone who'd turned survival into a science, who'd learned to read mountains the way a seal read water. She'd mentioned training in these caves, thousands of hours with her grandfather, learning skills that had kept him alive in places most people couldn't imagine, learning a war that had started before she was born. Your grandfather, Briggs said during a brief rest stop. Tell me about him. Cora's eyes went distant for a moment. Not sad exactly. Something else. Something harder. Colonel Hank Mercer. He served 30 years. Most of it in places that didn't officially exist. Afghanistan, Central America, Eastern Europe. Wherever the Cold War turned hot, he was there. Langley had moved closer, listening despite himself. His earlier skepticism had faded after watching Cora shoot, after watching her navigate. What was his specialty? Same as mine. Cora tapped her rifle. Long-range precision work. He had 47 confirmed kills in Afghanistan alone, but he always said the number didn't matter. What mattered was who you protected, who you brought home. She paused. He retired when my father was young, came to these mountains because they reminded him of Afghanistan, said the high country was the only place he felt normal anymore, the only place where the skills he'd learned had a purpose. What purpose? Surviving. Teaching others to survive. When my father came back from his own service, grandfather taught him everything. Then when I was old enough, he taught me. Briggs heard something in her voice, something that went beyond grief. He knew Volkov would come eventually. It wasn't a question. Cora nodded. They hunted each other for 3 years in Afghanistan. My grandfather said Volkov was the most dangerous man he ever faced, not because he was the best shooter or the best tactician, but because he was patient. He could wait years for the right moment, decades even, and now he's here. 40 years later, he built his weapons network, made his money, bought his mercenaries. Then he found out where my grandfather's family was, found out my grandfather was dead. Cora's grip tightened on her rifle. He came to finish it. Wipe out every Mercer, erase my grandfather's legacy completely. But you survived, because grandfather prepared me. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed something raw underneath. He spent 10 years getting me ready for this, teaching me every trail, every cave, every defensive position in these mountains, showing me where to hide, how to fight, when to run and when to stand. 10 years is a long time to prepare for something that might never happen. Cora looked at him. He always said a soldier's job doesn't end when the war does. The war just goes quiet for a while, and when it gets loud again, you have to be ready. She stood, checking the terrain ahead. He also said the worst thing a man can do is leave his family unprotected, so he made sure I could protect myself. The wind shifted, bringing sounds of distant engines, vehicles moving somewhere in the valley below. We need to keep moving. The storm's covering us for now, but Volkov has resources, men, equipment. He'll find our trail eventually. The team moved out. Briggs fell into step beside Cora. Your grandfather sounds like a remarkable man. He was, she said simply, and I'm going to make sure he didn't train me for nothing. The first real test came an hour later. They'd made good progress. The terrain had opened up slightly, allowing faster movement despite the storm. Mackenzie was holding on through sheer willpower, his face a mask of pain that he refused to acknowledge. Langley spotted them first. Contact. 3 o'clock. 200 meters. Patrol. 4 men. Cora dropped immediately, her rifle coming up in one smooth motion. The rest of the team followed, finding whatever cover they could in the rocky terrain. Briggs studied the patrol through his scope. 4 men, armed with military-grade weapons, moving in a search pattern. They weren't local militia. Their movements were too disciplined, too professional. Mercenaries, Cora whispered beside him. Volkov uses them for the serious work. Former military mostly. Russian, Eastern European. Some Americans who sold their skills to the highest bidder. Can we avoid them? Not without going back the way we came. And there are more behind us by now. Briggs calculated odds. 4 against 8 SEALs should be easy, but in their current condition, with Mackenzie barely mobile and ammunition running low, nothing was easy, and if they engaged, the sound would bring every other patrol in the area running. I can take them, Cora said. Her voice was calm. Matter of fact. Give me 60 seconds and you'll have a clear path. Briggs looked at her. 16 years old, offering to kill 4 men so his team could pass. How? Same as before. 1 shot, 1 target. They're bunched up. By the time they react to the first shot, I'll have the second one down. The other 2 will scatter, and you'll be through their position before they reorganize. That's a lot of assumptions. No, that's math and training, and the same calculations my grandfather taught me to make every time he put a rifle in my hands. Langley spoke up. His voice had lost all trace of the skepticism he'd shown earlier. She can make those shots, Captain. I've seen her work. She's not guessing. Briggs made the call. Take the shot, but the moment the last one drops, we move. No delays, no checking bodies. We get through and we keep going. Cora nodded once. Then she settled behind her rifle. The patrol was moving slowly, checking the terrain, looking for tracks that the storm had already erased. They had no idea death was watching them through a scope. Cora's breathing slowed. Her finger touched the trigger. First target, right side. He's carrying the radio. Take him out and they can't call for backup. She fired. The man dropped. His companion spun, weapons coming up, looking for the source of the shot. Second target, left side. He's starting to move toward cover. Cora fired again. Another man fell. The remaining two panicked. One ran for a rock formation. The other dropped flat and started shooting wildly in completely the wrong direction. Third target, the runner. He's almost to cover. The shot was harder. Moving target, increasing range. Cora fired. The runner stumbled, fell, didn't get up. Fourth target, the one on the ground. He's figured out where I am. Briggs saw it too. The surviving mercenary had oriented toward their position, was bringing his weapon up, was about to open fire. Cora fired one last time. Silence. 4 men dead in 8 seconds. Move, Briggs ordered. The team sprinted through the position, past bodies that were already being covered by falling snow, past weapons that would never be fired again. Cora ran with them, her rifle slung across her back, her face showing nothing, no satisfaction, no regret, just the blank expression of someone doing a job that needed to be done. They didn't stop for another 20 minutes. When they finally paused in the shelter of a rock overhang that offered minimal protection from the wind, Langley approached Cora. That was some shooting. Cora was checking her rifle, making sure snow hadn't gotten into the mechanism. My grandfather used to say the rifle is just a tool. The real weapon is the mind behind it. Knowing when to shoot, what to shoot, how to make each round count. He taught you well. He taught me to survive. Cora looked up. Everything else follows from that. Harmon had moved to check on Mackenzie. The Master Chief's condition was deteriorating. Infection was setting in despite everything they'd done. How far to the caves, Briggs asked. 1/2 kilometer. Cora pointed through the storm. There's an entrance just below the ridgeline. It's hidden from the valley floor. Volkov's people could walk right past it and never know it's there. And once we're inside, we can hold. The caves are defensible. Multiple chambers, several exits. My grandfather designed it that way. Made it a place where a small force could hold off a much larger one. Briggs felt something he hadn't felt in hours. Hope. Faint and fragile, but real. Let's move. We're almost there. They covered the last distance in 20 minutes. Cora led them to what looked like just another section of cliff face. But when she pulled aside a curtain of dead brush, an opening appeared. Narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, one at a time. Cora went first. Follow my path exactly. There are drop-offs in the first section. The seals followed her into darkness. The caves were everything Cora had promised and more. What started as a narrow entrance opened into a natural cavern, large enough to hold twice their number comfortably. Side passages branched off in multiple directions, each one offering escape routes or defensive positions. And it was warm, relatively speaking. The constant temperature of the cave, combined with protection from the wind, felt almost tropical after hours in the storm. Briggs positioned his team, setting up overlapping fields of fire on the entrance. Mackenzie was settled against a wall where Harmon could work on his ankle properly. The medical supplies were running low, but at least here they had time. Time to plan, time to wait, time to figure out how to survive until extraction. Cora moved through the cave with the familiarity of someone walking through their own home. She checked each passage, made sure nothing had changed since her last visit. My grandfather brought me here for the first time when I was 6. She said when she returned. He said a soldier needs to know their ground better than the enemy ever could. So he taught me every inch of these caves, every tunnel, every hiding spot, every place where you could set an ambush or escape from one. Langley was examining the walls, the rock formations that created natural defensive positions. This is remarkable, he said. A small force could hold this place against almost anything. That was the point. Cora sat down near the entrance, her rifle across her lap. In the flickering light of their tactical lights, she looked even younger than before, more vulnerable. Grandfather always said the mountains were full of places like this, natural fortresses, if you knew where to look. He found this one in his third year here, spent the next 20 years making it perfect. Perfect for what? Donovan asked. For this. Cora's voice was quiet. For the day when the war caught up with him, when enemies he'd made decades ago came looking for payback. She looked at Briggs. He always knew Volkov would come. He just didn't know when. So he prepared, made plans, trained me. And when he got sick, when he knew he wasn't going to be around to face Volkov himself, he made sure I could do it for him. The weight of that statement hung in the cave. A dying man preparing his teenage granddaughter to fight a war that started 40 years ago. Passing on not just skills, but a legacy of violence and survival. That's a heavy burden for anyone, Briggs said carefully, let alone someone your age. Cora's eyes met his. My grandfather didn't give me a burden. He gave me a choice. I could learn what he taught me and be ready when the time came. Or I could pretend none of it was real and hope for the best. She looked away. He said hope wasn't a strategy. Preparation was a strategy. Training was a strategy. Hope was what you did when you'd run out of everything else. Whitmore's voice cut through the moment. Captain, I'm getting something. Everyone turned. The communications specialist was hunched over his equipment, adjusting settings with careful precision. The interference is weakening. Storm might be breaking up. Can you reach anyone? Not yet, but if conditions keep improving, I might have a window in a few hours. Briggs felt that fragile hope strengthen slightly. Keep working on it. The moment you have a signal, you let me know. Whitmore nodded and went back to his equipment. Cora stood. We should establish watches. Volkov's men are out there. They'll be looking for us. And when they can't find our trail in the snow, they'll start searching systematically. Briggs nodded. The girl was right. They weren't safe. They were just less exposed than before. The real danger was still out there. Waiting. Patient. Just like Volkov had been patient for 40 years. The night passed slowly. Briggs rotated his team through watch positions, made sure everyone got at least a few hours of rest, tried to ignore the nagging worry that had settled in his gut. Mackenzie's condition was getting worse. The ankle had swelled to nearly twice its normal size. The infection was spreading despite Harmon's best efforts. Without proper medical treatment, antibiotics, possibly surgery, the Master Chief was looking at losing the leg, or worse. How long? Briggs asked Harmon during a quiet moment. Harmon's face told the story before his words did. 12 hours maybe. After that, we're into territory where even the best trauma center might not be enough. 12 hours. Their extraction window had passed. A new one wouldn't open for another 6 hours at best. And that assumed they could make contact, that the weather cooperated, that Volkov's forces didn't find them first. Too many assumptions. Too many variables. Not enough certainty. Cora appeared beside him. Your man is running out of time. I know. There might be a way, she said slowly, like she was working something out in her head. To buy him more time. To get Volkov's attention somewhere else while you wait for extraction. What kind of way? The mine complex, 3 kilometers north. My grandfather showed me how to collapse the main entrance. Said it would block the primary route through this section of the mountains. Briggs listened. If the mine comes down, Volkov's vehicles can't get through. His men have to go around. That adds hours to any approach. And how do we collapse a mine? Same way we collapse anything. Cora patted the pack she carried. Explosives. Briggs stared at her. You've been carrying explosives this whole time? Since the village. When I saw the smoke, I went back for supplies. My grandfather kept a cache hidden near our house. Weapons, ammunition, explosives, everything a person might need if the worst happened. And you just grabbed some and ran? I grabbed what I could carry and ran. Some of it's been useful. Some of it I haven't needed yet. She pulled open her pack. Inside, nestled among food and medical supplies and ammunition, was a bundle that made Briggs's eyes widen. Military-grade demolition charges, old but functional, enough to bring down a mountain. Where did your grandfather get this? Cora smiled for the first time since they'd met. He never really retired, not completely. He just relocated, and he made sure he had everything he might need when the time came. This is serious hardware. He was a serious man, and he knew what was coming. Briggs considered the plan. It was risky, dangerous, required someone to reach the mine complex, place the charges, and get clear before the collapse, through enemy territory, in the dark, in a storm. But if it worked, it would buy them time. Block Volkov's reinforcements. Give them a fighting chance to wait for extraction. "I'll go," Cora said, reading his thoughts. "I know the way. I've made this trip dozens of times. I can be there and back in 3 hours." "Absolutely not. It has to be me." She stood. "None of your people know the terrain. In this weather in the dark, they get lost in the first kilometer, or walk straight into Volkov's patrols. I'm not sending a civilian on a suicide mission." Cora's eyes hardened. "I'm not a civilian. I'm a soldier who happens to be 16. My grandfather was fighting wars at my age. My father was in uniform before he could vote. And I've been training for this moment since I was old enough to hold a rifle. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" She stepped closer. "Your man is dying. Your communications are down. You're trapped in a cave with enemies closing in from every direction. I'm offering you a way out, and you're refusing because I don't meet your definition of who's allowed to fight?" Briggs opened his mouth to argue, but Langley spoke first. "She's right, Captain." Everyone looked at the Triton scat. Langley's face was grim but resolved. "I've been watching her since we met. The way she moves, the way she shoots, the way she reads terrain. She's not pretending to be a soldier. She is one. Just young. And right now, she's our best option." Briggs looked around the cave, at his team, at Mackenzie, who was barely conscious now, at the entrance beyond which lay mountains full of men who wanted them dead, at Cora, who stood waiting for his decision. "If you go," he said slowly, "you don't engage unless you have no choice. You place the charges, you get clear, you come back here. No heroics, no detours, no revenge missions against Volkov." Cora nodded. "I understand. Do you? Because your grandfather trained you to fight this war. And part of me thinks you want to fight it, want to face Volkov yourself." Cora was quiet for a moment. "I do want to face him," she admitted. "He killed my family, destroyed my home. Everything I lost is because of him." Her hand touched her rifle. "But my grandfather also taught me that wanting something isn't enough reason to do it. You do what the mission requires, not what your heart demands." She met his eyes. "The mission requires those charges to blow. So that's what I'm going to do." Briggs made his decision. "All right, you go, but you take a radio. You check in every 30 minutes, and if anything goes wrong, anything at all, you get back here." "Understood." Cora gathered her equipment, the explosives, extra ammunition, a small medical kit. She paused at the cave entrance. "If I don't come back," she said quietly, "the caves have 3 other exits. My grandfather marked them on a map. It's in the waterproof case in my pack. Use them to get your team out." Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness and the storm. Briggs watched the entrance for a long moment. 16 years old, walking into enemy territory alone, carrying explosives, fighting a war that started before she was born. He'd led men into danger hundreds of times, had made peace with the fact that some of them wouldn't come back. But this was different. This felt like sending a child to do an adult's work, even if that child was more capable than most adults he'd ever met. "She'll be all right," Langley said, moving beside him. "She knows what she's doing. She's 16. She's Colonel Hank Mercer's granddaughter. And from what I can see, she's every bit the soldier he was." Briggs didn't answer. He just watched the entrance and waited. Cora moved through the darkness like a ghost. The storm had weakened slightly, enough to see 50 meters ahead instead of 10, enough to navigate by landmarks she'd memorized years ago. Every rock formation, every tree line, every ridge and valley and hidden path. Her grandfather had made her walk this ground so many times she could do it in her sleep, had tested her in daylight and darkness, in summer heat and winter cold, until the terrain was as familiar as her own heartbeat. Now that training was keeping her alive. She spotted the first patrol 10 minutes after leaving the caves. 4 men, moving in a search pattern along the lower ridge, their lights sweeping back and forth across the snow. Cora went still, controlled her breathing, became just another shadow in a landscape full of shadows. The patrol passed within 30 meters of her position. They never knew she was there. She waited until they'd moved on, then continued her journey. The mine complex loomed out of the darkness an hour later, a collection of abandoned buildings clustered around a dark entrance that had been carved into the mountainside decades ago. The main tunnel ran deep into the rock. Other passages branched off in various directions. Her grandfather had explored every inch of it, had shown her where the support structures were weakest, where a few well-placed charges could bring the whole thing down. Cora approached carefully, checking for guards, for tripwires, for any sign that Volkov had discovered this place. Nothing. The mine complex was exactly as she remembered it, empty, waiting. She moved to the entrance. Inside, the darkness was absolute. She pulled out a small flashlight, keeping the beam low, and pointed at the ground. Shadows jumped and danced as she advanced deeper into the tunnel. 200 meters in. That was where the critical point was, where her grandfather had identified the structural weakness that would cause a cascade failure. Bring down not just the entrance, but 100 meters of tunnel behind it. Block this route completely. Cora found the spot, set her pack down, began placing the charges. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Her grandfather had taught her demolitions the same way he'd taught her everything else. With patience, with repetition, with the understanding that mistakes cost lives. She was halfway through the placement when she heard it. Footsteps, coming from deeper in the mine. Cora froze. Someone else was here. She killed her flashlight, drew her pistol, pressed herself against the tunnel wall. The footsteps grew closer, measured, unhurried, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. Then a voice spoke, a voice she'd heard only in recordings, only in her grandfather's stories, only in nightmares she'd had since the village burned. I wondered if you would come here. Sergei Volkov stepped out of the darkness. He was older than she'd imagined. 64 years of hard living showed in the lines on his face, the gray in his hair, the careful way he moved. But his eyes were exactly as her grandfather had described them. Cold, patient, utterly without mercy. Cora Mercer. He said her name like he was tasting it. I've been looking forward to meeting you. She raised her pistol. Don't move. Or what? You'll shoot me? Volkov smiled. Perhaps. But then you won't finish placing your charges, and your friends in the caves will die when my men overwhelm them. Is that what your grandfather would have wanted? Cora's finger tightened on the trigger. How do you know about the caves? I've spent 40 years studying your grandfather, learning everything about him, his methods, his contacts, his safe houses. You think I didn't know about his little mountain fortress? Volkov stepped closer. Cora stepped back. He prepared you well. I can see that. You have his eyes, his steadiness. But you're still young, still making mistakes. Like what? Like thinking I came here alone. Cora heard movement behind her. 2 more men, coming from the tunnel entrance, cutting off her escape. She was trapped. Put the gun down, Volkov said, and perhaps we can have a conversation. I have questions about your grandfather, things I've wondered about for 4 decades. You're the only one left who might have answers. I don't have anything to say to you. No. Not even about how he died? Not even about the last words he spoke? Volkov's smile widened. You see, I know he prepared you, trained you, turned you into a weapon I could use against him, but he never got to face me himself. Never got to finish what we started in Afghanistan. His eyes gleamed in the dim light. It must have eaten at him, knowing I was still out there, knowing he was getting old, getting sick, and the one enemy he couldn't defeat was still waiting. My grandfather wasn't afraid of you. No, he wasn't. That was always his flaw. Too much courage, not enough patience. He should have kept hunting me, should have never stopped until one of us was dead. But he retired, came to these mountains, started a family. Volkov shook his head. He got soft, and now his family is dead because of it. Cora felt rage building in her chest, hot and dangerous. The same rage she'd felt standing in the ruins of her village, looking at the bodies of everyone she'd ever loved. My grandfather was worth 100 of you. Perhaps, but I'm the one still breathing, and you're the one surrounded by my men with nowhere to run. The two mercenaries had closed to within 10 meters, their weapons trained on her back. Cora's mind raced. She had seconds to make a decision. Fight and die here, or surrender and probably die anyway. Neither option was acceptable. Then she remembered something her grandfather had told her. When you're trapped, when there's no way out, you make a way out. You change the situation. You do something the enemy doesn't expect. Cora lowered her pistol. Fine. You want to talk? Let's talk. Volkov raised an eyebrow. A reasonable choice. One condition. You're not in a position to make conditions. One condition, Cora repeated. Or I pull the detonator and bring this whole mine down on all of us right now. She held up her left hand. In it was a small device, a remote trigger, connected to the charges she'd already placed. Volkov's smile faltered. You haven't finished placing them. The collapse won't be complete. Maybe not, but I'll be dead, and you'll probably be dead, and you'll never get your answers about my grandfather. Silence stretched between them. Then Volkov laughed. You really are his granddaughter. The same madness, the same willingness to die for nothing. Not for nothing. For time. My friends are in those caves. Every minute I keep you here is a minute closer to their extraction, a minute closer to help arriving. They won't come in time. Maybe not. But maybe is better than a definitely. And right now, definitely is what happens if I don't do something. Volkov studied her. For the first time, something like respect flickered in his eyes. Your condition? You tell me what happened in Afghanistan? The real story. Not the intelligence reports, not the official versions. What really happened between you and my grandfather? Why? Because he never told me. He trained me, prepared me. But he never explained why you hated each other so much. Why this war had to continue across 40 years and 2 generations. Volkov considered. Then he gestured to his men. They lowered their weapons. Not completely, but enough. It was 1985. Volkov began. Your grandfather was running operations in the mountains near Kandahar. I was KGB, counterinsurgency. Our paths crossed during a mission that was supposed to be simple. What happened? He killed 12 of my men in a single night, without being seen, without leaving evidence, without giving us any chance to fight back. We woke up surrounded by bodies and he was gone. Volkov's voice carried old anger, old wounds. For 3 years after that, we hunted each other. I caught him once. He escaped. He caught me once. I escaped. It became personal. More than just war. More than just duty. Why? Because he was everything I wanted to be, Volkov admitted. The perfect soldier. Cold when he needed to be cold. Ruthless when the situation demanded it. But still human. Still capable of mercy. He looked at Cora. I was never capable of mercy. And I hated him for making me see that. For showing me what I could have been if I'd made different choices. So you've spent 40 years hunting his family because you couldn't beat him? I spent 40 years building an empire, making money, gaining power. The family was just unfinished business. You killed my parents, my brother, 23 innocent people. They weren't innocent. They were mercers. They carried his blood, his legacy. As long as any of you existed, he won. Cora felt her grip tighten on the detonator. And now? Now there's just you, the last mercer, the final piece of unfinished business. Volkov stepped closer. I could kill you right now. End it all. But that seems too simple, too quick. Your grandfather made me wait 40 years. Perhaps you deserve the same consideration. What does that mean? It means I'm going to give you a choice, the same choice your grandfather had in Afghanistan. You can run, disappear into these mountains and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, or you can fight. Here, now, just you and me. Cora stared at him. You're insane. Perhaps. But I'm also curious. Your grandfather trained you for this moment. Let's see if his training was good enough. Your men will not interfere. Volkov held up a hand. On my honor, such as it is. Why would I trust you? Because I want this to mean something. Killing you while you're surrounded would be satisfying. But killing you after a fair fight, that would be a victory. That would prove finally that I was better than him. Cora understood. This wasn't about her. This had never been about her. This was about a war that started 40 years ago. About two men who'd defined themselves by their hatred of each other. About a conflict that could only end when one bloodline was completely extinguished. Her grandfather had prepared her for this moment, had trained her for exactly this scenario, and he'd taught her one final lesson, one she'd never fully understood until right now. When you face the wolf, don't run, look it in the eye, and don't blink. Cora put the detonator back in her pocket, holstered her pistol, and unslung her rifle. Fair fight, she said. Rifles, 100 meters. Volkov smiled. Agreed. They set up at opposite ends of the mine entrance. 100 meters of open ground between them. Volkov's men formed a perimeter, not interfering, just watching. This was their leader's fight, his obsession, his moment. Cora checked her rifle. Her grandfather's Remington 700, the same weapon he'd carried in Afghanistan, the same weapon he'd used to build his legend. Now it would either continue that legacy or end it. She took her position, breathed deep, let everything else fall away. The cold, the fear, the weight of 40 years of history pressing down on her shoulders. None of it mattered. Only the shot mattered. Only the breathing. Only the steady heartbeat that she'd learned to slow to almost nothing. Volkov raised his rifle. A modern weapon, military grade, scope optimized for distance. He had every advantage. Age, experience, resources. But Cora had something he didn't. She had her grandfather's training, his knowledge, his final gift. When the moment came, she heard his voice in her head, clear as if he was standing beside her. One breath. She inhaled. One bullet. She exhaled halfway. One target. She held. Don't think. Don't aim. Just shoot. They fired simultaneously. Cora felt the round pass her cheek. So close it drew blood. So close she felt the heat of its passage. 100 meters away, Volkov staggered, looked down at his chest, at the spreading red stain. He smiled, then fell. Cora stayed in position, rifle still aimed, waiting for the mercenaries to react, waiting for them to avenge their leader. They didn't move. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of them lowered his weapon, then another. They looked at each other, at their dead employer, at the 16-year-old girl who'd killed him. And they made a choice. The same choice mercenaries always make when the paycheck stops coming. They left, fading into the storm, not their fight anymore. Cora stayed in position until they were gone. Then she walked to Volkov's body. He was still breathing, barely. You were right, he whispered, about your grandfather, about his training. I should have killed you immediately. Yes, you should have. He coughed, blood on his lips. Tell me, was this what he wanted? For you to finish it? No, this is what I wanted. What he wanted was for me to survive. She knelt beside him. But I'm his granddaughter. I couldn't just survive. I had to win. Volkov laughed, a wet, terrible sound. He would have been proud. I know. Volkov's eyes lost their focus. His breathing stopped, and a war that had lasted 40 years finally ended. Cora finished placing the charges, set the timer, and walked away. Behind her, the mine collapsed, a deep rumbling boom that echoed across the mountains. Rock and timber and 40 years of hatred buried under tons of stone. She reached the caves 2 hours later. Briggs was waiting at the entrance. The explosion, he said. We heard it. The mine is closed. Volkov is dead. She walked past him into the cave, sat down against a wall, and for the first time since this all began, let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The grief, the fear, the exhaustion, the weight of what she'd done. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. But she felt it all. Every loss, every death, every moment of the past 3 days pressing down on her like the stone that now buried her grandfather's enemy. Briggs sat down beside her. Didn't say anything. Just sat. Sometimes that was enough. The radio crackled to life an hour later. Whitmore's voice cut through the cave. Contact. I have contact. Extraction inbound. 45 minutes. Briggs was on his feet immediately. Coordinates. 2 clicks south. Clearing big enough for the bird. He turned to his team. Get Mackenzie ready to move. Everyone else, pack up. We're leaving. The SEALs moved with renewed energy, the promise of extraction pushing them past their exhaustion. Cora stood slowly. Her body ached. Her mind felt empty. But she was alive, and her family's war was over. You're coming with us, Briggs said. It wasn't a question. She started to argue. Habit, maybe, or stubbornness. But Briggs cut her off. You're coming with us. We owe you that much. More than that, really. What about everything here? My home? Your home burned. Your family's gone. Everything you were fighting for is finished. His voice was gentle but firm. Now you need to figure out what you're fighting for next, and you can't do that from a cave in Montana. Cora looked around, at the place her grandfather had prepared, at the walls that had sheltered her through the longest night of her life, at the end of everything she'd known. Okay, she said finally, okay. The extraction was textbook. The helicopter appeared exactly on schedule, a beautiful sight against the clearing sky. The storm had broken completely, leaving a world of pure white under a cold blue sky. Mackenzie was loaded first, the medics taking over immediately. Harmon briefing them on everything he'd done, everything that still needed to be done. The rest of the team followed, one by one, until only Cora was left. She stood at the helicopter's door, looking back at the mountains that had been her entire world, her grandfather's mountains, her family's grave, her childhood's end. Briggs held out his hand. Come on, it's time. Cora took his hand, climbed aboard, and let the helicopter carry her away from everything she'd ever known. She cried on the flight back, for the first time since the village burned, silent tears that she didn't try to hide. Briggs sat beside her, didn't speak, didn't offer empty comfort, just let her grieve. Langley handed her a canteen, water, small gesture, but kind. The rest of the team gave her space, respected what she'd done, understood what it cost. They landed at a forward operating base 3 hours later. Mackenzie was rushed to surgery. The rest of the team was processed. Debriefings would come later. Paperwork, reports, the bureaucratic machinery of military operations grinding forward. Cora sat in a corner of the base hospital, wrapped in a blanket, drinking coffee that someone had pushed into her hands. She didn't know what happened next. Didn't know where she'd go, what she'd do. Everything she'd been raised for was finished. The war was over. The enemy was dead. The legacy was complete. Now what? Briggs found her an hour later. Your grandfather, he said, sitting down beside her. He was a legend. I read his file while you were getting checked out. Some of the things he did, they're still classified. Probably always will be. He was just my grandfather, Cora said. He taught me to shoot, told me stories, made sure I was ready for what happened out there. Briggs nodded. Most people live their whole lives without being tested like that. You're 16, and you've already passed tests that would break people twice your age. I don't feel like I passed anything. I feel empty. That's normal. Trust me. After action, after the adrenaline fades, there's always emptiness. It means you're human. He paused. What do you want to do now? I don't know, Cora admitted. I never thought past this, the fight, the ending. My grandfather prepared me for the war, but he never told me what to do when the war was over. Maybe that's because he wanted you to choose, wanted you to have a life he never got to have. Cora considered that. A life beyond fighting, beyond survival, beyond the legacy of violence that had defined her family for generations. I don't know how to do that, she said quietly. I don't know how to be normal. Neither do most veterans. Briggs smiled slightly. There are people who can help, programs, support. You're not alone in this. What about official things? I don't have papers, don't have family, Don't have anything except my grandfather's rifle and the clothes I'm wearing. We'll figure it out. You saved 8 American lives. The government owes you, and I'll make sure they pay. 6 months later, Cora stood in front of a small house in Colorado. The mountains here reminded her of home. Gentler, maybe. Less angry, but still tall and quiet and covered in snow. The family inside had agreed to foster her, a retired Army sergeant and his wife. People who understood military life, who wouldn't ask too many questions about why a 16-year-old girl sometimes woke up screaming. She'd started school. It was strange. Sitting in classrooms with kids her own age who complained about homework and worried about social media. She tried not to judge them, tried to remember that their normal was not her normal, and that was okay. She'd also started working with a veterans organization, helping older soldiers deal with their trauma, sharing stories, listening to theirs. Turns out, a lifetime of training by a Cold War legend gave you perspectives that other people found valuable. Who knew? A car pulled up the driveway. Briggs got out. He'd kept in touch, checking on her, making sure the system didn't forget about her. He walked up to where she stood, looking out at the mountains. "How are you doing?" "Better. Some days, other days. Not so much. That's progress. I got a letter from Langley. He said Mackenzie kept the leg. Going to need months of rehab, but he'll walk again." "I heard." Briggs smiled. He also won't shut up about the girl who saved his life. Tells everyone he meets. "I didn't save his life. I just showed you the way out." Same thing. In the mountains, knowing the way is everything. Cora reached into her pocket, pulled out a photograph. Her grandfather, young and strong and alive, standing in mountains that could have been these mountains, or could have been Afghanistan, or could have been anywhere. "I'm going to visit his grave," she said, "before it gets too late in the season. Put flowers down. Tell him it's finished. I'll come with you, if you want." "I'd like that." They stood together for a moment, looking at the mountains, feeling the cold wind on their faces. "He'd be proud of you," Briggs said finally, "for what you did out there, for how you're handling what comes after." "I know." Cora put the photograph away. "That's what makes it hard. He trained me to fight, and I won, but now I have to learn something he never taught me." "What's that?" "How to stop." The grave was in a small cemetery on the edge of town. Simple headstone, simple words. Colonel Hank Mercer, soldier, father, grandfather. Cora knelt beside it, placed flowers on the snow, and said the words she'd been carrying since the mine collapsed on Volkov's body. "It's done, grandfather. The war is over. Volkov is dead. The family is avenged." She paused. "I don't know if this is what you wanted. You trained me to survive, to fight, to win. But you never told me what to do when the fighting was done." The wind stirred the flowers. "I'm going to figure it out. Going to learn how to be something other than a soldier. Going to have the life you never got to have." She touched the cold stone. "But I'll never forget what you taught me. The skills, the discipline, the knowledge. It saved my life. Saved others. That's worth something." She stood. "Mission complete, grandfather." Then she walked away. Briggs was waiting by the car. "Ready?" "Ready." They drove in silence for a while. Then Cora spoke. "I've been thinking about what comes next. After school. After everything. And I want to help people. People like me. People who've lost everything and don't know how to start over. There are programs for that. Organizations. I know. I've been looking into them. Maybe I can turn what I learned into something that helps instead of hurts." Briggs nodded. "Your grandfather would like that." "Yeah." Cora looked out the window at the mountains passing by. "I think he would." 1 year later, Cora stood in front of a room full of young people. Some had lost parents to violence. Some had escaped war zones. Some had survived things no child should have to survive. All of them were looking at her, waiting. "My name is Cora Mercer," she began. "When I was 16, my entire family was killed. I survived because my grandfather trained me, taught me skills that most people never need to learn." She paused. "For a long time, I didn't know what to do with what I knew. Fighting was all I understood. Survival was all I'd been taught. She looked at their faces, young, scared, lost, just like she'd been. But survival isn't enough, not in the long run. At some point, you have to start living, start building something, start becoming more than just someone who didn't die. She smiled. It's hard, I'm not going to lie. Some days you'll want to give up. Some days the past will feel so heavy you can't imagine carrying it another step. She touched her grandfather's dog tags, which she wore around her neck. But you're not alone. None of you. And together we're going to figure out how to turn survivors into something more. How to take the strength that kept us alive and use it to build lives worth living. The room was silent. Then one kid raised his hand. A boy, maybe 13, eyes too old for his face. How do you know it gets better? Cora considered the question. Thought about her grandfather, about the seals she'd saved, about Volkov, buried under a mountain, about everything she'd lost and everything she'd found. Because I'm standing here, she said finally. A year ago, I was hiding in a cave, watching enemies close in from every direction. Now I'm here, with you, building something new. She spread her hands. That's proof. Not that it's easy, not that it doesn't hurt, but that it's possible. And possible is all we need to start. That night she wrote a letter to Captain Nathan Briggs, to the man who'd given her a chance when he could have left her in the mountains. Captain Briggs, it's been a year since Montana, a year since you pulled me onto that helicopter and flew me away from everything I'd ever known. I wanted you to know I'm doing okay. More than okay, actually. I'm teaching, helping kids who've been through things similar to what I went through, trying to pass on what my grandfather taught me, but in a way that builds something instead of just destroying enemies. It's strange. He trained me for war, but the skills he gave me, the discipline, the focus, the ability to stay calm when everything is chaos, those work for peace too. Who knew? Mackenzie stopped by last month. He's walking now, still limps, but he says that just gives him character. He told me the whole team talks about me. The girl in white, they call me. I'm not sure how I feel about that. My grandfather used to say that a soldier's job doesn't end when the war does. The war just goes quiet for a while. I think I finally understand what he meant. The war against Volkov is over, but there are other wars. Against fear, against despair, against the voice that tells survivors they'll never be whole again. Those wars I can fight. Thank you for everything. For trusting me when you had no reason to. For treating me like a soldier when everyone else saw a child. For giving me a chance to become something more than just the last Mercer standing. My grandfather would have liked you, I think. You have the same eyes he had. The eyes of someone who's seen too much but keeps going anyway. Take care of yourself. Take care of your team. And if you're ever in Colorado, look me up. I make terrible coffee, but the mountains are beautiful. With respect and gratitude, Cora Mercer. Briggs read the letter in his office, smiled, folded it carefully, put it in a drawer with other letters, other reminders of missions completed and lives saved, and the strange paths that led people to each other. She's doing well, Langley said from the doorway. I saw her last month. She's different. Good different. She was always going to be okay, Briggs said. Her grandfather made sure of that. You really think so? Briggs thought about a 16-year-old girl walking through a blizzard alone, facing down a man who'd been her family's enemy for 40 years, firing a rifle that had belonged to a legend and proving herself worthy of the legacy. I know so, he said. She's a Mercer. They don't quit. They don't break. They just adapt and overcome and keep going. Langley nodded. Hell of a thing, though. 16 years old, and she saved all of us. Briggs looked out his window, at mountains that could have been any mountains, at snow that could have been any snow, at a world that kept turning no matter how many wars were fought in its shadows. They laughed when they heard she was 16, he said quietly. They stopped laughing pretty quick. Langley smiled. Yeah, they did. The mountains remembered. The snow remembered. And 8 SEALs who'd underestimated a 16-year-old girl with her grandfather's rifle remembered most of all. They remembered the moment she opened fire and changed everything. They remembered the way she moved through the storm, leading them to safety. They remembered her standing alone against an enemy who'd haunted her family for 4 decades. And they remembered what she taught them without ever meaning to. That heroes don't always look like what you expect. That courage doesn't care about age or size or circumstance. That sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is a girl who refuses to let her family's legacy die. Cora Mercer survived, more than survived. She found a way to turn her grandfather's gift into something that would outlast them both. A legacy of strength passed to those who needed it most. A war transformed into healing. A soldier who learned to build instead of destroy. And somewhere, in whatever place old soldiers go when their battles are finally done, Colonel Hank Mercer smiled. His granddaughter had completed the mission, all of them.